All right. Hello, everyone. We're going to wait for some more friends to join. But hello, and welcome to the International Student Wellbeing Workshop. My name is Antonia. I use she, her pronouns. I work in the Office of University Life as a program manager working on well-being events. So we'll have so many for you throughout the year. But thank you so much for coming to this one. It's in partnership with our friends from the International Students and Scholars Office. That's Chad. Hello. And then our presenter today is from Student Financial Services, Trista. Hello. Thank you both so much for being here. If you want to ask any questions on the Slido link, we'll have that for you. If you also want to ask questions in the chat, we'll be responding to questions there as well. And this event is going to be recorded. So if you would like to look at it again later or share with your friends, that is totally available to you, and that'll be emailed to you after this. Okay, so hello and welcome. First, I'd like to tell you about the 7 dimensions of well-being. Since this is a financial well-being event, let's look at all the dimensions of well-being. So as you can see in this slide, which I will slide to, Columbia uses 7 dimensions of well-being. They are emotional, physical, relational, spiritual, financial, intellectual, and career. So by starting this out, you might say, oh, okay, this event is really for my financial well-being. But by the end of it, you might have related more to the emotional or relational aspects, which just shows the diversity of our well-being journeys. So now thank you for listening to that. And I'm going to be off camera for the rest of the time, but that's fine. I'll be here answering any questions. I'm going to hand it over to Trista. Thank you so much.
Antonia, thank you so much for that. And thank you, Chad, for being here as well. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to whichever it happens to be to you for everyone here. My name is Trista, as Antonia had mentioned, and I work in the Office of Student Financial Services. And my role is more of a central role here at the university, but one of my favorite things that I get to do because of it being central is talk to such a wide array of students here at the university, just like you, our international students, right? So for today, we're going to talk about a couple of different things. We're starting off with some of the basics of understanding the US financial system and really just being prepared to get started when you're here. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right quick. Fantastic. And as long as everybody can see that, we are going to go ahead and get started. Now, if you see me popping my eyes to the side of the screen, that's just because I'm watching the chat in case any questions come in. I want to be able to answer them as we go. Antonia mentioned that we had shared a Slido link as well earlier on. If you'd like to ask questions that way, you certainly can. And Antonia, if you want to pop that into the chat, that'd be wonderful as well. Because that's another way that, again, if you want to share questions anonymously, you can choose to do that. I have that up on my screen on the left-hand side. So again, if you see the eyes going back and forth, it's just I'm monitoring for you. I want to make sure I'm getting your questions. To that end, though, we have a very brief agenda listed here for you. First, we're going to talk about financial literacy and financial wellness, what those two things really are. From there, again, we'll talk about the basics of finances, right? And understanding what that means coming into the US. We're also going to talk about understanding what a spending plan is and how we can use that, not just for our needs today, but for our needs as we come into school and well beyond, right? The concepts we have here today are going to live with us for a lot longer than we are here at the university, is the hope. We'll also give you some key contact information, look at some of the websites that are available to you through the university so that you have access to them. And we'll also talk a little bit about one of the resources that's available to you here at the university called iGrad. And if you haven't heard of iGrad, what it is it's financial wellness and education platform tool that's available to you as a student here at the university, both now and after you leave school at no cost. So the idea behind this is that it's information that you can use today just to improve your financial knowledge and your understanding of finances in the sense of, actual knowledge and skills, but also in the way that you feel about your finances, right? Because it's one thing to have knowledge and skills, it's another to really put it into practice and make yourself feel good about what we're doing, right? So you'll also notice as we go through the presentation, one, there's a lot of information on these slides. This is going to be distributed to you, so please do not feel like you're missing something if you didn't write it down or if you didn't happen to see it. I try and build these as resources for you, but I'm going to talk about the key points and everything that we want to chat on today. So please do not feel like you missed something if you didn't get a chance to look at a specific spot on the screen. We can also go back to things if we need to. And two, if you have any questions, you also can certainly, again, ask them in the chat using that link that Antonia popped in, or of course, you'll also have my contact information after we finish the session today. So you can reach out to me directly if you have follow-up questions as well. To that end, let's go ahead and get started. So as Antonia mentioned, the university has 7 dimensions of well-being that we put into our understanding of what wellness really is. And as she noted, we have spiritual, emotional, intellectual, physical, relational, career, and then down at the bottom, we have financial, right? It's kind of the odd man out here, just the one that kind of feels a little bit different than the rest. As we think about things like our intellectual well-being, certainly we're coming into school, right? We're going to be starting a new period of study for a lot of us. Intellectual wellness is something we can certainly expand on in that context, but at the same time, we can also think about financial and how it impacts the rest of these areas, right? If our financial wellness isn't where it should be, we don't feel great about our finances, it can impact our emotional state. It can also make studying a little bit more challenging because we have lack of focus. And of course, things like stress can cause problems for us physically, and we certainly can have that be a problem for us relationally as well, as we start not to feel well. We tend to kind of, put ourselves in a box where we might be putting our experiences onto others, right? So we want to make sure that when we think about our finances, we're not just looking at that literal context of money in, money out, dollars and dollars. We want to make sure we understand what those dollars are supposed to do for us, right? They're supposed to make our lives better, not more stressful. So more literally, if we want to go to kind of a formal definition, we can think of financial wellness as a state of being where we have control over our day-to-day and month-to-month finances. We have the capacity to absorb a financial shock. We're on track to meet our financial goals, and we have the financial freedom to make the choices that allow us to enjoy life. So that last statement right there is really where that warm, fuzzy wellness feeling starts to come in, right? We think about what we're talking about here. We've got control, we've got capacity, we're on track, and it leads to this sense of freedom. So that's really what wellness is driving at. So then how exactly do we get to this place of wellness, right? It would be wonderful if we could just kind of pop over to Wellness Street and be there. That'd be great. But instead, we need to rely on something called financial literacy to help us do that. So with that being said, I wanted to get a better idea as to what the group really thinks financial literacy is. If you're familiar with it at all, go ahead and the QR code that you see there on the screen, that's for Slido. Just in a word or two, what you really think financial literacy means. And again, it can be anything that you have as far as familiarity with it. If it's something like understanding your money, if it's something along the lines of just being able to do things, please share it with us. We'll give it about a minute or so for people to pop that information in. Awesome. I see we're getting some feedback here. We have budgeting per month. That's a great answer. You guys are giving some good answers. I can tell it's taken a few seconds to get through them. Being able to manage day-to-day finances and plan for the unseen, knowing how to manage your money, fantastic. Awareness of financial aspects and managing financial aspects, awesome. Knowing the terminology, that is a very good point. Long-term vision and awareness. Oh, I love that. That's a fantastic answer. This is awesome. You guys have a lot of really, really great feedback here. It all looks like we understand the need to understand where our money's going, when and how, right? And understanding some of the things that we're looking at, which is great. I couldn't agree more on those fronts, right? Thank you so much for the feedback that you're all sharing. And again, if we haven't gotten to it on the screen yet, please keep typing it in. We'll give it another few seconds or so because these are great answers. This is awesome. So it looks like we're starting to kind of come to the end of the answers we're getting today. And again, we have a theme here, right? As we look at this, we can see that we have information related to a lot of different financial topics. What this really means, right, in the context of financial literacy and wellness, it's our path to financial wellness, right? There's a lot of different literal definitions of what financial literacy actually is, as we can see from the answers that we got going through this past exercise, right? However, it's going to be different for each of us because our understanding of wellness is different, okay? And you'll see a lot of the talk today being kind of related to this concept of subjectivity, largely because we are all individuals, one from each other, to from us yesterday and tomorrow, right? I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, nor will I be in 10 years, I imagine. So when we think about financial literacy in its most basic sense, it's the way that you're going to get to financial wellness. It's the steps you'll take, right? And the most important component of that is, of course, one, knowledge and skills, understanding the information. And we saw a couple of references to that in the answers that we got, knowing terminology, being able to look at the numbers and put them into practice, right? But there's also the action component, right? It's more than just knowing information. We need to be able to put that information into good practical use. So for example, we had mentions of terminology, right? It's good to know the terms, but if we don't kind of put them together in a way where we can go ahead and drive towards our goals and make choices that make sense for us, it's just definitions at that point, right? It's not taking us where we need to go. So we always want to remember not just the information we need to know, but being able to put it into practice. So to start us off, excuse me for that. We're going to start off talking about an area where we get a lot of questions from our international students when we first come into the country, right? Kind of just understanding the US financial system in its most basic sense, right? Now, today we're going to kind of go over some very basic information. The idea being we can go ahead throughout the year and continue to expand on these for you. One of the things you'll see as we get towards the end of the session is we're going to ask you to share your thoughts on what we should be talking about next, and we'll have a few other things like that throughout the session. We want to make sure that we're meeting your needs. So the immediate need for today, for most of our students, is understanding how to get started when you get here, right? So when we talk about financial institutions here in the US, all it really means is that we're talking about a company that's engaged in the business of financial and monetary transactions. Really, really simple. Now, that can mean a lot of different things, right? Again, there's a lot of definitions to stuff when we use kind of these one common word definitions in financial information in the US, right? Now, for us, all that means is they can encompass a broad range of business operations within the financial services sector, including things like banks, which most of us have heard of, trust companies, insurance companies, which is interesting. Most of us don't think about insurance being a financial institution, but it is something transactional that deals with money, brokerage firms and investment dealers. But for today, we're really going to be focusing on one particular area. And that's going to be on banks and credit unions, right? So as we saw, there's a bunch of different types of financial institutions that are out there, but the ones that you're most apt to be using when you first get started here are banks and credit unions, okay? And they're consumer entities, and all that really means is that you as a person utilizing it is a consumer, okay? And they offer insured deposit accounts like checking accounts, savings accounts, or certificates of deposit, which is a CD. And they can offer other products as well, things like mortgages, loans, credit cards, retirement and investment services, and account holder benefits, right? So they're kind of often all-encompassing. You can often choose one entity that you really, really like and go there for kind of all of your needs. But as we go through this, you'll see that there's specific types of accounts that are treated a little differently within each entity you pursue. So that's important to know as we continue on. Now, what that really means, right? When we talk about those consumer banking options, we have commercial banks and credit unions, right? Those are banks that offer those deposit accounts, those things like when we get paid and we put our money into an account, or if we're receiving funding that we're utilizing for our education and we put it into a financial institution account. That's exactly what a depository account is, something you can put money into and generally pull the money back out of, right? That's the hope. And of these two types, commercial banks are the ones that most of us are probably familiar with in some sense, right? They're financial institutions that engage in those various financial services we talked about, including deposits, and in some instances making loans, right? Now, one thing that we want to be aware of is that there is insurance to your money with this type of depository account, right? So whenever we go to a commercial bank, if we're using a checking or savings account, those depository type action accounts, you have the benefit of choosing a bank that is insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, and they insure your account up to $250,000, okay? That's important just because if something were to happen, you want to know that your money is going to be there if you try to get it, right? So something that's important to be aware of. And in most cases, typically if you're going to walk into a brick and mortar bank, you'll usually see something about the FDIC right on the door. It'll kind of have it on the door or the window adjacent to it saying that they're FDIC insured. Now, the other side of this conversation is a credit union, okay? So Commercial banks and credit unions are very, very similar with a few key differences. When we talk about commercial banks, we're talking about people that we pursue as customers, right? You are the customer of that bank. You're making the choice to be there. And they typically don't have any type of unique criteria as far as like a membership idea to be able to utilize their depository accounts. And most of them are owned by shareholders, right? Typically something where we see a CEO and a couple of people that are making big decisions for this private organization. Now, credit unions, on the other hand, they don't look at their individuals that utilize their service as customers. Instead, they're members, right? It's this idea of the individual being the board, so to speak, right? You get to help make the decisions as a member of that entity. For that reason, they all have their own membership criteria beyond what you would typically need to do in order to get a bank account, okay? And we'll talk about that in just a moment. These are also, unlike those banks that we talked about, they're not-for-profit organizations, excuse me, that are owned by the members. They're, again, technically the board making the decisions. So just so that you're aware of the difference, in day-to-day functionality, they're going to feel very, very similar. The only time you'll kind of really feel an immediate difference is if you were to walk into one and a credit union, they have certain types of people they'll be willing to give an account to based on their membership criteria, where that will not be the case at a commercial bank. That's something you're doing as a customer, and it's a service. So from here, when we talk about those credit unions, the other reason that they're very similar is they are also insured accounts, right? Instead of it being through the Federal Deposit and Insurance Corporation, they're also insured through the National Credit Union Administration, or NCUA, and they also insure up to $250,000 per individual, okay? Now, one of the very common questions that we get is, how do I go about actually starting to open an account, right? Whether it's going to be at a credit union or your commercial banks. This is actually information directly from the ISSO website, right? So you can get back to this if you need to. As far as the information you might need, we've had students be able to open their accounts using things like their passports, their I-20s or DS-2019s. You'll probably need your admission letter for Columbia, something showing your local address, and your Columbia ID if you have it, okay? With that being said, you shouldn't need a social security number explicitly or a unique letter from the ISSO office. And again, this is directly from their website. The idea here is we want you to be prepared for when you go in, okay, and go to open your account. Now, one thing you may want to be aware of is when you walk into a bank to open your account, or if you're looking to do it online, for example, as you do that, you may be asked to give a social security number because it's a common thing that people will provide, okay? You can certainly explain that you do not have one and then go through and ask if you can provide the other documentation that you have. Don't let that initial interest in a social security number, if you don't have one, be a reason not to pursue getting your account, okay? We actually had some additional Q&A along with this question that came in advance. One of them was how long it takes to open a bank account in the US. The actual act of opening a bank account is relatively quick. In most cases, if you're walking into a bank, you can typically do it almost right then and there. Maybe 2 to 3 days if they want to go through and review additional information based on what you've shared with them. Online kind of works the same way. With that being said, though, there can be some exceptions in unique circumstances. So if you want to get the firm time frame for the specific financial institution you're looking at, you can make the ask when you're going in. They'll be able to let you know based on your individual circumstances, roughly how long they expect it to take. But in most cases, you're looking at a few days to actually open the account, assuming you have everything that you need. Now, the next question that we got in relation to this was, which bank do you recommend for international students upon arrival? Also, what are the documents required for opening a bank account? So good news, we talked on the documents a little bit. Now, as far as what bank to utilize, we can't make a specific recommendation for a financial institution. However, we are going to give you information on how you can start to make some of those choices for yourself, right? Some of the things you may want to ask in order to better understand if this is the right financial institution for you. And also on the ISSO website, there's a list of banks that students have successfully opened accounts with in the past. So you can look at that as well as a resource. So then what are we looking for in a checking account, right? Well, there's a couple of things that we want to do. We want to first decide where we want to go for this particular account. Is it going to be a local bank, like a consumer bank, or do we want to do a credit union? For most of us, I imagine we're looking, if we're going local, the closest ones are probably going to be consumer banks, right? Those private entities. We also want to understand the services that they offer and the fees that could potentially go with it, okay? To address the question we just got, where can we find this list of financial institutions where students have opened accounts and the benefits offered by them? So it doesn't list the benefits explicitly, but I will share the ISSO website that has that information in this presentation for you with the material. So you can click on the link and go right there. It's right on the ISSO website. And if you go up to the top search box on the ISSO website and just search banks, it's one of the first results that you get in their search. Great question. So in addition to understanding the different types of banks that are out there, oh, thank you, Chad. He just popped the whole little bit of it right into the chat. Thank you so much. So that's actually the text I was referencing. Oh, you're the best, Chad. Thank you. You basically want to start asking yourself what's important to you with your bank account, right? I want to pay my bills in an easy fashion, right? That typically means we're looking for a checking account or we're looking for a savings account. Are you going to need access to things like money orders, right? Those are something that you can purchase through a bank or through other local organizations, sometimes the post office, other entities can sell them as well. And you're basically trading your cash for a piece of paper that says it's worth that value. It's a lot like a check in that sense, except it's a little bit more immediate. You've already provided direct cash for that purchase, okay? Do they offer bill payment services, right? Can you set up banking information to go directly to some of where your bills are being paid? Is that important to you? Do you have access to things like a debit card or an ATM card, right? An ATM meaning automatic teller machine. And all that really is it's a little plastic card, much like a credit card that you get to potentially have access to your money at individual little non-specific banking institutions, right? They're kind of just normally outside the bank or right inside the bank. They can be at your local consumer places like your Stop and Shops and your grocery stores and things like that. Also, you kind of want to ask a little bit more about where there may be fees, right? So when we talk about some of the fees that may be unique to banking and unique to international students, one, if you're planning on sending money back and forth internationally, if there's a unique cost for that they might incur as far as your account goes. Also, and that's considered under that wire transfer context that you're seeing mentioned here. If they have any information related to the impact of the exchange rate in the conversation as well, you can certainly ask about that and should. Also, you want to find out kind of if there are any fees associated with things like overdraft, for example, and all that really means is if you have $100 in your account and you try and spend 125, that's what an overdraft is. Do they charge you extra for that? And how frequently do they do it? And how much is that charge? Is there a way to mitigate that, right? So for some banks, they'll offer you the opportunity to use something called overdraft protection. And that usually is set up in this context of not opening just a checking account, but also a partnered savings account, right? And that means that when you go over on the checking account, they pull the money out of the savings account. That can be a benefit if you're looking to utilize something like that. So the whole idea is you want to sit down and think about what you really need out of your financial institution. And then for any organization you're looking at pursuing, bringing that list of questions with you. They can provide the specific answers for you so that you get exactly what you need out of the account you're looking at. To go with that, I'm also sharing a couple of resources with this today. One is going to talk a little bit more about the differences between a traditional bank, a credit union, and also internet-only banks. We didn't touch a lot on those today, but an internet-only bank, just kind of in summary, is a bank that isn't like your local financial institution. You know, you walk into a bank and they also have online services. It's not that. This is a bank that isn't associated necessarily with any other brick and mortar bank and is only online services, and they don't necessarily fall under the same FDIC rules for insurance. So you want to make sure you understand that the online services you're looking at are through either a larger organization and they are FDIC insured, or if they're not. So that's a really great resource for you to have here as well. I see another few questions come through. It looks like Chad got the one for us related to Santander, and thank you for that. We also have, how long does it take for international students to procure credit cards? Yeah, so we actually had a very similar question come through in the pre-Q&A related to that as well. And we're not talking explicitly about credit cards today, but just to kind of touch on it very briefly, since it is one of the things that our students do ask about. When we're talking about credit as an international student, as you come into the country, it's almost like instead of thinking of yourself as being an international student, you're like somebody that's just never had credit before, right? In most cases, you can't bring the credit that you've earned from your your home country with you. Unfortunately, most institutions aren't checking for that. They're looking at the US financial system information explicitly for that. Instead, you want to take a look for those options that may be a little bit easier to get approved for earlier on. And I actually will share a resource for that has a couple of those in there. We have things that are called, secured credit cards, which is one option for you. And I'm not saying we recommend this option, but to show what it is. Basically, the idea is you apply for a credit card, and let's say this credit card, as an example, is only $200 is your maximum that you can utilize on it. You may need to give them $200 to go with it. But the benefit there, right, because you've given them the $200 to go with it, it's almost like, you're giving collateral to use that line of credit, kind of like a mortgage works, right? You have a house that goes with it. That's why it's valued a little differently. You're putting a little bit more, quote, skin in the game by giving them the money that you're actually going to spend, okay? And in doing that, you have the capability then to use that card. And it still acts like credit instead of acting like a bank account, a debit card, because those don't get recorded in the credit system, unfortunately. That secured card will. And in doing that, you'll start to build your credit history. The biggest thing you can do to build your credit history is using credit and paying it on time. That's the largest bulk of that. So definitely go through that process of, using your credit as it's available in that circumstance, and then you'll start to see additional opportunities open up to you. And that secured card is one option for that. Another, for some people, they'll look at like retail cards, right? Retail cards are offered usually directly through the company that you're looking to make purchases through. Let's say, like Macy's would be an example, any of those retail stores that you may be shopping at. They're typically a little bit easier to get approved as far as that goes, but they don't have collateral like the money that you put in with the secured card. So what that means is that you're ultimately going to see higher interest rates associated with them, right? When you put money in, you have the benefit of it kind of being like a security blanket for the entity you're pursuing. They at least have the $200 if you never pay, right? That doesn't happen with the retail card. So the difference that they charge is in the interest rate instead. Now, if you're paying it off every month, you won't ever really feel that, right? And that's good for your credit history as well. They're just choices that you have. So in addition to that, there are other things that you can do, but just to kind of give a couple to answer that question off the top of my head, I can do that. And I'll share those resources with you as well. And we'll keep that as an idea for what we want to do in the future for our sessions. Let's see. I know that we've had a couple other questions come through, but we do have a couple of things to go through here today. So I want to make sure that we get to those. Let's see, is there any specific group or person I can reach out to get some personalized guidance on managing these transfers of money, payments, and bills? Yeah, so we don't have anybody explicitly at the university that can give specific guidance. However, I do have a list of the different types of professionals that can help with that type of service. So what I'll do is I'll include that with the session materials as well. So this way you can take a look at the different type of financial professionals that are out there to assist with that particular kind of conversation. Absolutely. And let's see, in a lot of banking institutions, the student checking bank accounts are valid for students age 18 to 24 or 25. For anyone above that age, would you advise? Yeah, so we're actually about to get to that question for Roy in just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed so we can kind of get to that piece of it, and we'll keep the questions coming. I'm definitely going to get to them. And if for some reason we can't get to a question today, please know that I will share an answer or resources for you in the materials after we wrap up. And we're keeping that Slido Q&A open for a week after the end of the session. So even if we didn't get a chance to ask today, if you're viewing it later and you want to ask a question, go ahead and use the QR codes that you see and ask the questions as well. And we'll make sure that gets answered for you. Now, from here, I did also want to point out, since we talked a little bit about iGrad, one of the things that's really great about iGrad, one, is the vast majority of the information in this presentation today came from iGrad directly, right? My background, just in full disclosure, I have worked in financial aid for closer to 20 years now than I'd like to admit. So what that means is that I learned what I'm talking to you about today largely through iGrad, okay? So there's a lot of really great information for you here on the topics we're talking about today and so much more, including banking related information. So there's a couple of courses I would recommend looking at. First, protecting yourself from identity theft and scams. That is something that can happen in the US and anywhere really. So it's not new for most of us, but at the same time, knowing what to do about it could be a little bit new in the event it happens and how to kind of protect yourself in advance. We also have information on creating a financial plan for your priorities and goals, which is really important, right? Making sure that we're setting ourselves up for success. And then lastly, we also have where this information came from, banking with financial institutions, right? And this is a little snapshot of what the courses in iGrad look like. The way that they work is you get a little synopsis of the course with a few learning objectives. It'll tell you kind of what knowledge level you may need for this course, whether it's a beginner course, intermediate, or advanced, and about how long it'll take to do it. The best part is that it's customized. You get to do a pre-assessment, and then from there, after you go through the pre-assessment, you'll get questions and information that are tailored to you based on that pre-assessment. And afterward, you get a post-assessment. So you actually get to see how much you've learned after you've gone through the course. And you also get a personalized action plan on what you might choose to do based on the way you've engaged with that course as well. So it's meant to be really specific to you, as well as give you really good information for your circumstances. And to answer the question I saw about when do we get access to iGrad, as soon as you have your university network ID, your uni, and you can log into the system, you can create an iGrad account. And as long as we have time today before the end of the session, I hope to show you exactly how you can go ahead and create that account. Great question. And also a question for routine usage of money, what would you suggest, a debit card or a credit one? Well, that's not a unique question. It's an interesting question. It's not a matter of which one is better necessarily. It's going to be what one's going to better meet your needs, right? One of the benefits of using your credit or debit card, right, is that you're only able to use the money you have access to. If you're the type of person that feels like you can, potentially overspend very easily, I tend to do that. I'm a bit of an impulse person. I'll buy things that look like they're on sale, even though I didn't need it. That's not saving anybody money, right? And I will absolutely share the link for iGrad. That will definitely be with the presentation materials as well. But for me, I tend to stick to my debit card for that reason, because if I can't go over what I have, Now, on the other side of that, if you're somebody that's a little bit more comfortable with the idea of using credit and you have some long-term objectives that you're hoping to achieve related to credit-based things that you'll do while you're in the US, let's say you were going to be here for a little bit, maybe you're hoping to, ultimately buy a home at some point, or you just want to be able to use your credit a little bit more than you would otherwise for a shorter period of time, credit could potentially be something that's a benefit to you there. As long as you're doing it in a way where it's not costing you anything, right? The idea being, if you're going to use credit, you have it and then you pay it off. You have it and then you pay it off, because that helps you build your credit without overextending yourself. And by doing that, you set up that positive credit history that'll make it easier to get other types of credit as you continue in your time in the US. So very good question. And thank you so much again, Chad and Antonia, for sharing the information you have in the chat. I appreciate it. So moving away from kind of the financial institution side of the conversation, I do want to touch a little bit on this idea of being prepared in the context of what to expect with your finances when you get here, right? For many of us, the idea of living in New York City from wherever we're coming from is going to be a really, really new experience for us, right? I'll tell you, I live in New Jersey. I'm only about 40 minutes away, and it's like I'm in a different world when I get into Manhattan, okay? It's just a unique place to be, and it's got some really unique things about it. And then, of course, we're all unique individuals and people, right? So that's really important within the context of how we understand our finances. And we're going to go through a couple of steps to kind of reframe how we think about that in our time here. So the first step in this process, and you'll see a theme about this as we go through the presentation on this section, is just knowing what's important to you. And you've heard me say that a couple of times already in relation to some of the questions that we've had, because we're all so unique, right? And that's largely because we all come from very different places, both individually in our understanding of who we are, and of course, physically, our locations and the different cultures that we come from, whether those cultures are related to the individual families we live in, or related to the places that we've lived in the past or where we live now, or even just some of the more niche communities that we may see ourselves as part of, right? All of those things impact the way that we understand what is our values, right? What's important to us and what our beliefs are, how we understand the world. And those things ultimately impact our attitudes and behaviors, right? So it's important to realize this in the context of the way we make our financial decisions, and we'll see that as we continue on. Just keep in mind that all of these things impact kind of the minutia of what we do every day, right? Whether that's going through into a room and saying hello to somebody, if we're comfortable making that first hello, or if we're going to sit back until somebody else does that for us, that's one version of it. Another is the way we approach our finances. Am I willing to utilize credit? Not everybody's comfortable with this idea of debt. And how important is that to you? Or do I need to think think about things through the lens of what my family would say, or am I comfortable doing this as an individual? Am I empowered to do that? So again, as we go through this, just make sure you're thinking about you in specific context and the way that you kind of frame the information that we're getting today. So we need to think about what exactly we have as needs and what is a want, right? So if we think about that in its most basic sense, a need, they're very basic things that are necessary for survival. That seems pretty simple, right? We all need to be able to breathe, eat, sleep, the basics. However, need can be very subjective, right? What I need right now might be a sip of water because my mouth is dry, okay? What it might be tomorrow is completely different. What you need as a student coming into the university might be information and resources, right? Because some of the other things are already taken care of. But in 10 years from now, that's not going to be what we all need, right? In some sense, some of it will be, of course, but things like a sip of water when you're thirsty, but in the greater context, we change over time, right? So we need to make sure we're thinking about that individual information based on where we are, okay? First and foremost, we have to meet our physiological needs, again, breathing, food, water, all those kind of things to make sure our life can exist the way we hope for it to. Very high on the list next, we have our safety, which is the security of our body, the understanding of, the money that we have available to us to support ourselves, making sure that we're healthy. And then we have love and belonging. For a lot of us, that's where the culture starts to come in and the friendship groups that we make, the societies that we're part of. Esteem is, again, how we start to feel about ourselves. That's where the wellness component starts to come in. So you can start to see how all of this kind of foundational pyramid, that we have on the right-hand side of the screen, which is actually built as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you've ever heard of that. It's a very common concept that we start to see when we talk about things like needs, because you have to get the bottom tier in most cases first, and then you can move up, and then you can move up. So as you're thinking about your needs, think about what you can actually satisfy right now. Do you know how to satisfy your physiological needs, your safety needs? Then start to focus on that love and belonging, esteem, and then self-actualization, right? So we want to make sure that those top ones are taken care of by supporting the bottom. That's how we want to frame our needs, okay? Now, wants, on the other hand, those are things that we desire, right? Things that really just make life more satisfying. That might be the newest version of the latest cell phone that came out, as an example, a new computer. It could be something like the latest and greatest new outfits that are coming out, right? So we need to make sure that we think about those things in that context. And if it's something that we don't need today, that is something we can plan for. That's a want for tomorrow, which we can certainly reframe as a goal, something to plan for. I see I have a question come through. I have a doubt. ID, someone could please help me with that. Can we show our international driving license, then passport? Because I guess it could be risky to carry your passport everywhere. That is a very good point. So I don't know that I can give a specific answer there on that front, but what I would agree with is yes, I wouldn't recommend carrying your passport everywhere because it's really important to you and something that you need. In most cases, there are other forms of ID that you will otherwise already have or can obtain if you haven't already to suffice some of the identification needs that you may need. And each entity you work with, whether it's financial or not, will have a different level of ID that you may need, whether they consider it a government ID or not. And there could be some other things that you could use in lieu of a passport, things like consulate cards, things like that. So I can certainly take a look for some resources for you there, but also in the context of this presentation, we do have some resources about alternatives to things like Social Security cards, because again, you'll probably be asked for that at first, even though you shouldn't have to provide it necessarily for a bank account. One of the resources there has a list of other types of ID that are commonly accepted as well. And thank you so much, Chad, for sharing your input on that as well. So I'm not going to go through all of these today, but the idea here is that knowing that needs and wants are subjective, that means we kind of have to self-question, right? How do we determine whether or not something is a need or a want? We have to think about what we are actually looking to accomplish with this particular item. What is this cost, fulfilling for us? Is it something we can live with or not? How important is it? How are we going to feel about this today, tomorrow, and later on if we choose to, one, get it, or two, not? Okay, so I wanted to include this as a resource. You could think through some of these questions. And as we go through, we're also going to be having a few more follow-up sessions as the semester goes on, excuse me. So one of the things that we'll be doing is kind of building off of this piece of the presentation when it comes to the context of budgeting, right? I know we had a question come in earlier before the event about budgeting tips, and this is one of the ones that I would highly recommend, is sitting down, asking these questions as you're evaluating your expenses so that you're really focusing on your long-term needs, right? Starting there without putting yourself in a deficit that's going to put you in a position where you don't feel you can be successful. And these are some of the questions that can help you do that. But after going through that, if you're still not sure, right, the only thing I could otherwise recommend would be talk to your resource network, right? You have people available to you that know you very well, your family, your friends. As you start to come to school, the people that you engage with here, start to ask those questions and see if they can help you decide, kind of by mirroring back to you, right? They've watched you go through life. Ask those questions. And iGrad also has a really nice tool to help you do this as well. So what you're seeing here on the screen, this is actually snapshots of iGrad's Your Money Personality Assessment. It sounds a little kind of like clickbait, I guess, your money personality, but it's not, it really isn't. What this is, it's actually just a very basic personality assessment that at the end of it, you get about a 40-page booklet of information related to how your personality traits may influence how you engage with your money. Okay, so this is actually a snapshot of a piece of mine. So I'm sharing with the world. Okay, one of the things that I was noted in my particular assessment in relation to the emotional component of my personality is that I can be a little impulsive. Absolutely true. I mentioned that earlier. This is how I kind of had it thrown back in my face. iGrad told me. Very accurate, though. It'll tell you how you compare with other people, which can be helpful in deciding how you approach conversations with others in this topic, because again, people may have different viewpoints than you, and how likely is that? The other side of it is they're actually going to be giving you information not just related to where you may need to improve, because that's a little negative sounding. There's lots of great things about the way our personalities influence our money as well, right? So they're also going to talk about our biggest strengths and what that means. So when we talked about being relaxed, again, as I got, that can lead to impulsivity, but it also can lead to being, comfortable with risk, right? And when we start talking about risk, we can kind of start going into the investment side of the conversation. We all can kind of relate to this idea that risk can be potentially, things like stocks and, whether or not we're going to get our money back on something or lose it. There's a lot of opportunity there sometimes, depending on your circumstances. And for some people, they're very afraid to kind of approach that. That's not something I am. So that's very true. They can help you understand that. In addition to that, they actually give you tangible action items that you can utilize as well. So you can see on the top right-hand side of the screen, for somebody that could potentially be impulsive, number 2, slow down, take a beat before you buy. Yes, that is something I certainly have a problem with. During the pandemic, just as an example, doing a lot of online shopping, I started to see way more brown boxes piling up outside of my home than I would like. And I felt really bad seeing the recycling gentlemen that do our recycling here taking the stuff out constantly. So I needed to do something about it. Not, of course, just because I can see it, right? It made me feel bad, but I can also see the impact on my money, right? It's just depleting and going and going. And that's not what I wanted for my money. One of the benefits for me during the pandemic was I wasn't commuting into Manhattan from New Jersey, which can be expensive, right? So I had extra money lying around. What can I do to get this to work for me better? Here, that recommendation of slow down, take a beat before you buy, I thought, well, if I'm ordering something online, the fastest I'm apt to get it is within 2 days, right? Which means I don't need it today. I'm willing to wait for it. So what I would do is I'd go through, buy the things, quote, that I wanted to buy by putting them in my cart and not actually making the purchase. I'd say, all right, wait 2 days, go back to the cart, take a look at it. And 1, if you still need it, you can get it. 2, if you don't remember why it's there or have found another way to solve what you were looking to solve by making that purchase, you can take it out and not having had made it. So it let me set up an actual tangible, practice that helped me from overspending in ways that I didn't want to during that period. Now, after going through a bunch of that self-evaluation, that's so important, we then have to just look at some numbers, right? This is not necessarily fun, but we have to do it. We need to know what our income levels are and our expenses are, right? You want to sit down and take a period of time to evaluate that information, whether it's going to be 2 weeks, a month, a semester, something else, really just a period of time that makes sense in the context of the way you perceive money. For some of us, that's going to be bi-weekly, okay? Bi-weekly because we get paid bi-weekly maybe. For others, we pay our bills on a month-to-month kind of a expenditure timeline, and that might be something that's more comfortable. For those of us that have been in school for a little bit, maybe looking at it based on semester expenses is a way to go. Let's say because we've ultimately gotten used to having to plan for that chunk of time of 4 months to 5 months at a time, right? With that in mind, you also want to look at kind of some of the unique things that can happen during that period. For example, if you had any kind of atypical spending or money receipts at that point. In the US, tax time is a good example of that. Taxes for federal taxes are usually due at one point in the year in April, okay? So by doing that, let's say you're covering that period during April, ultimately you wouldn't want to account for whatever that cost was or the windfall of money that you got at that point either, because it's not something that happens all of the time, okay? You also want to make sure you're considering all of your income and expenses. So if something didn't happen, that usually does during that period, you want to account for that as well. Now, moving on to our next slide, we can actually see a little bit of an example of how you can go about doing this, okay? This is iGrad's daily income and expense diary, and you'll see this come back again as we continue on, one in this presentation, but two later on in the semester, because we're planning on having some work done around this particular document, right? But the idea here is that it's a daily income and expense diary that lets you go through and track day by day the amount of money that you had come in versus the amount of money that you had go out. Okay, so let's say on day one, that's when you get paid. You would put the amount that you received in pay, and that's kind of what you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen. If on day two, you had some type of expense, let's say you ultimately went and bought groceries that day, you would put the amount that you spent in groceries on that day. And this is for a period of time for this particular document of 30 days, right? At the end of that month, you're going to get something like we see on the left-hand side of the screen, okay? So it starts off by giving you the actual amounts that you have spent dollar for dollar based on the tracking that you've done. So if you're the type of person that is very literal with seeing those dollars and that will be helpful for you, that's right there for you. It'll also show you whether or not you've got more money left over or under money left over, not enough left over, right? And then lastly, for those of us that are a little more visual, we also get a pie chart of what our expenses looked like, right? For me, I find this very helpful. I'm a visual type of person. And in this particular example, we can see that we've got, in this case, the person with that bigger, large blue chunk on the side, it looks like they're spending most of their money on home expenses, right? So for the area that they live in the tri-state, around this area, that's not all that weird, right? Home expenses can be a little bit high in the area. So that's pretty typical. And as long as they have the money left over and they're achieving what they want to achieve, they're probably in a good place. Now, if we as students were doing this and we look at that and we see that that leftover bucket was all for, let's say, fun expenses, right? Well, what does that tell us? One, awesome, we're meeting our needs, right? Two, what else could this money be doing for us instead, right? Perhaps we want to start putting away some money aside for emergencies. A lot of us don't necessarily think about emergencies when we come in to the country at first, right? We want to make sure we're thinking about right now. We've kind of planned the year out at the beginning, but for many of us, we have a second year of our education, and who knows what can happen by the time we get there. So having some money set aside for emergencies is extraordinarily important. If you see that you have the resources to do that, you can do that. Now, if you went through this and you kind of saw that you didn't have enough money left over, that's where those kind of self-evaluation questions start to come in, because there are adjustments that need to happen, right? What can I reasonably adjust here and still be comfortable with what I have going on? Now, for the questions that we have asking about where the diary is in the spreadsheet, the good news is that the actual daily income and expense diary that's in orange on this particular slide is a link. So as soon as you get the materials, that will link directly to it for you, so you have access to it. And you have a partner document that will be linked with this as well that kind of lets you expand on that as well. So when you're ready, beyond kind of just tracking money in, money out for month one, you can start to do it over a year, not day by day, but instead looking at how successful you are in adhering to your monthly budget over the period of a year. So you'll have links for both of those at the end of the session. Now, after we've gone through the process of actually tracking, right, this is where we need to analyze. And then we started to talk about this on the last screen, right? Did we meet all of our needs? And if so, awesome. If not, why? Okay, did we overspend? Did we not plan the amount of money that we thought we were going to, right? Were we not realistic in some of those things that we put together and just not understand what our expenses were? Did we include all of our expenses? Again, some of those things that may happen kind of not as frequently as others. Did you have extra resources, right? We talked about that as well. What can we do with planning for emergencies? And then lastly, Are we using the tools that are best for us, right? I know for me, I tend to like to do things very manually. This document is actually one that I use personally. After I saw it with iGrad, I found it a lot easier to use than some of the other things that are out there. Now, for some of us, we like to have things at our fingertips, right? Maybe a cell phone with an app is the way to go. For me, it didn't work. I would see the phone buzz and go, nope. Just put it to the side, and that's not helpful for me. So it's about finding the tool that makes the most sense for you as well. Now, these are some examples of some of the tools that may be available to you to do that, right? We talked about the idea of using an app, for example. There's also, of course, things like Excel spreadsheets and Google Sheets that we just looked at. There's also computer programs that are out there that you can utilize. For some of us that maybe are just kind of getting into the idea of budgeting and really tracking income and expenses. Perhaps you're the type of person that needs to write things down for them to click. I find writing things down very, very helpful. There's a method that's called the back of the envelope method that can potentially be utilized. The idea being you have an envelope, you have a certain amount of money for your expenses, you put it in the envelope and write what it's for on the back. And when it's gone, it's gone. Okay. Now, I would never recommend that you actually do that unless you have somewhere safe to keep your money, right? But you can certainly do that in a less actual kind of money in the envelope way. If you want, you can do that using something like a tracking mechanism, like a piece of paper in a notebook or something like that, so that you're writing it down and then have access to the money in a safe place, of course. But the idea is that writing it down can sometimes be helpful. The other tool that's available to you, and this one is actually through iGrad, is what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen. Okay, this is their Your Budget tool. In addition to the ones that we've already talked about, those spreadsheets that I mentioned, this is something that's actually in the iGrad platform. That's, instead of being static and something you need to kind of go through on a once to month basis type of thing, this is a little more dynamic, meaning that as you work within it, it'll change values for you. So let's say you go ahead and put your income and expenses in here, and you find that maybe we're at a point where we just don't have enough resources and we need to make some adjustments, right? The nice thing about it is you'll see there's these little bubbles on each of the lines for income and expenses, right? You can toggle those back and forth and it'll actually adjust your budget in real time on the right adjacent to that for you, right? So where it says monthly net, if you see that that's in the red and you want to go ahead and say, well, maybe I can reduce this particular expense. Perhaps it's, things like dining out, or perhaps it's something along the lines of maybe looking for additional work while you're here, if that's something that's available to you, of course. You can then adjust the income side of it and you can see it change right there in order to go through that process. The other side of it is they also have a really nice capability for saving for your goals in there as well. So let's say you are trying to put together an emergency plan and you want to have a certain amount by a certain period of time. If you want to make sure that it's good to go, you can click that goal button that they have and go ahead and enter the date that you hope to achieve the goal by, put the amount that you're looking to save for it, and it'll put it right into the budget for you. And if you go into the red, meaning you've gone negative, you know that it's not realistic and you have to go ahead and modify that goal. So this is a nice dynamic way of going through your budget as well. And again, this is actually linked for you on this slide too. Now, as you're setting your goals, you do want to make sure that you're doing them in a way that they're more apt to be meaningful and successful. Okay, and what does that mean? When we think about goals, sometimes they're just really, really big, right? And we want to get to that goal, but there's a lot of things we need to do first to get there. There's a few ways that we can start to approach our goals to make sure that we get to that point. First, and one that I like to use is something called the SMART goal setting method. And if you're not familiar with it, it just is an acronym to stand for the idea that our goals need to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Okay. Specific is important. The reason that specific is important is, again, if our goals are too big, we often can't see all the details that we need to be realistically able to achieve them. Let's say we have a goal that we want to go on vacation. Awesome. If that's our goal, how do I start to plan for it? Well, I can't. I don't have enough information to ultimately do it, right? If I say I want to go on vacation to Hawaii in 2025 with my sister, we're going to stay in this hotel, we're going to, fly on this airline, we're looking to go get there for 2 weeks, I can actually start making plans towards that goal because I have enough information to do so. If you have trouble kind of coming up with all of those details, I often do. One thing you can do is kind of this concept of the funneling method. You start with your big goal and then try to answer the questions that we just talked through, right? Well, I don't know what to do now. Answer that question. I don't know what to do now. Answer that question. And it funnels down to the minutia of what you need to get to that goal. Okay. Now, measurable. This is important because goals that we can track, we can actually start to see if we're making meaningful progress toward. With that being said, you want to make sure that your goals have timelines associated with them for that reason. Achievable, again, is important. The reason being that, again, if we just using that goal calculator we just talked about, if it's not going to be something you can realistically achieve in the amount of time that you have, you're never going to be able to be successful at getting there. And nothing is less wonderful feeling than not making a goal happen, right? So you want to set yourself up for success at the start by planning realistically. Realistic is an interesting one as well, for much the same reason. Also, we'll see the R represent relevant sometimes too. And relevant sounds interesting in the sense that, well, if I'm planning the goal, why wouldn't it be relevant to me? Well, again, we are products of the things around us, including those people and those circumstances that influence us. Some of the things that we plan for aren't really meant for us. They may be for our families, they may be for the people around us or society as a whole. You want to make sure that these goals are the ones that you want to pursue because you're more apt to be successful in doing it. And then timely, again, is reference to a deadline. You have to actually be able to achieve the goal. Now, deadlines can change, right? If you say you want to go on vacation in 2025 and you see that as you're measuring things, right? That's not realistic anymore based on things that have changed, adjust. There's nothing wrong with adjusting. That's not a loss, that's a win, okay? It means you recognize the need to make a change. Now, one of the other things that's really important with goals is setting up successful systems to achieve them, right? I like to liken this to the idea of somebody that wants to, let's say, run a 5K, right? They've never done any running before. They're not terribly fit, but they want to go ahead and run a 5K. Well, if you've never exercised before, what do you need to do to make yourself exercise? You have to come up with a plan that's going to motivate you to do that. For some people, that might be putting, your workout clothes on as your pajamas and keeping your shoes next to the bed. That's a system, right? That shows you a way of making it happen. If you're looking at, let's say, putting together an emergency savings plan, you're not really sure that you'll have enough money to get started with it. Well, one of the things you can do, and this is potentially a service they may offer, for example, at some of the financial institutions that you work with, it's this idea of saving your rounded money, right? So anytime you have a purchase that's got change on it, they'll take the remaining change and round up to the next dollar and put it into your savings account. That's a really mindless way to start saving money if you've never done it before. And then just seeing that little bit of growth can be really helpful. That's a system. So you want to make sure that you're finding those things that are going to incentivize you to be successful in achieving those SMART goals. I see that we had a question come through. What are the key dates for payment of fees and Columbia accommodation? Columbia accommodation, I'm assuming that you mean housing there. Those dates I don't have off the top of my head, but I can certainly share the information from the housing and residential websites as well. Oh, Chad beat me. Thank you so much. As far as the billing side of things, we do have a billing site that we can share as well. And I have that linked in the presentation too. And I think Chad may have just shared some of that information for the residential side as well. But the Student Financial Services website, which I'm hoping to be able to show everybody today, does have information, including the billing schedule on it for each individual term, which was another question that we got in advance, is how the billing works. We do that by term as well, okay? And now the last piece of this then is we don't want to just think about our expenses today, but we want to think about how our money is going to be, satisfying our needs today and our needs tomorrow. We're going to move into this concept of a spending plan, right? It represents our current resources, our expenses, and then the direction our money will take and the goals we hope to achieve. It's big stuff, right? So the first thing to do is estimate our projected expenses and income. Now that can be really hard, especially let's say if we're coming from a place where we've never had to pay tuition directly before. They don't know exactly what living in New York City is going to look like, right? We have a couple of resources here to help you do that we'll go through. First, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has something called the Consumer Price Index for the New York City area. And basically, that's just a percentage tracking mechanism of certain types of cost expenditures. They call them baskets of goods. They're usually things like your groceries, your utilities, things like that, and the percentage of which they've changed over several months, okay? So that can help you in understanding whether or not costs are likely to go up or down. The New York City Comptroller Affordability Index has something that's a little bit more dollar to dollar specific, right? They show you for certain types of family sizes and family circumstances, even a family being, one person, for example, kind of what the average cost expenditures are in the area. iGrad also has a slew of calculators available to help you understand what your money looks like today, and given the certain circumstances you pursue, what that could look like tomorrow. And the last thing I would also say is consider all of your available resources, right? You don't want to just think about resources in the money as the money in your pocket, but you want to think about the services and options that are around you as well, and make sure that you're utilizing them to your best benefit. Just so that you're not missing out on anything. And if you're not sure if something might be, available to you, let's say you're looking for assistance with something, along the lines of maybe covering tuition, speak with your financial aid office. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You absolutely should use the vast resources that are available here at the university. Okay. And of course, as you do this, you want to make sure that you're meeting your current needs first, always, because if we're not satisfying those immediate needs, right, just like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we saw, we'll never be able to grow on our pyramid. We won't get to the point where we're getting to that financial freedom and wellness feeling we're looking to get to. Use your SMART goals and then look at your available resources and prioritize them for what you're hoping to achieve. Now, this last slide in this section, right, assess, reflect, and adjust. We're not going to go through this in depth today, but there's a good reason for it, right? We're actually looking to create a session about this October or so where we go through these exact circumstances, right? Look at our budget. How did we do over the period of time that we were assessing? And what do we need to do to ultimately change circumstances should that be necessary, right? We want to make sure we're asking ourselves questions like how well we stuck to the plan, where did we struggle, where did we succeed, and what can we learn from those successes? Were we reasonable in making our goals? And then ultimately, if we did need to make changes, what can we do, right? And the idea behind doing this is it creates this sense of control that goes along with our financial wellness, right? That freedom component. It'll help us control those things that could potentially set us off track. And by doing that, we can control the decisions that we make in association with that and how we respond to those circumstances. And in doing so, we can then control the potential consequences of the way that we've engaged with our money. And consequences can be good or bad, right? If we kind of went off track, we're probably looking at the negative side, but that only gives us a chance to improve, right? Consequences can be good. If we did really, really well, let's try and get better consequences like that again. And all of those things ultimately lead to control of your money, okay? The most important point I can make with this, though, I know that this concept of staring at money for a long period of time can be a little deflating, right? Nobody likes to do it. But self-reflection in this process is crucial, right? This is a cycle. It's not something we'll do once. It's something we're going to do over and over and over throughout our lives if we want our finances to be successful, right? We talked about the need to be adaptable when we talked about financial literacy and take action. Well, if we're not looking at our finances, we can't adapt. We're not apt to find where the issues are, right? So sit down and see a success being the fact that you look at it and the fact that you adjust as you need to, because that is just as successful as seeing you did everything you would hope to do in a period of evaluation. Now, with that said, we're going to move on to this concept of student spending plans, right? Taking all the information we've just talked about and some of those more literal things for what we're walking into at the university, right? We've talked about a few of these already, projecting our expenses. We talked about those resources. We've also talked a little bit about, just understanding what money we may need for any given certain expense. But we're going to talk about them now in the context of the options you have as a student coming into the university. Now, when we talk about projecting expenses, right, I mentioned that can be a little challenging. One of the really valuable tools that you have here at the university for doing that explicitly as a student at Columbia is called your cost of attendance, okay? And what your cost of attendance is a representation of the amount that you as a student may reasonably expect school to cost over an established period, most commonly for a term or a year, right? You may also hear it called your COA or your budget. It can be kind of referenced in a couple of different ways on different sites at the university. And it includes a couple of different things, what we call your direct and your indirect costs, which we're going to touch on what those are in just a minute. There's a few places where you can potentially find that at the university. If you have a type of financial aid award in any way, you would have received that with your financial aid award from the financial aid office, but it's also available on a few of the websites here at the school. And in last resort, if you can't find it, get in touch with your financial aid office. They can absolutely provide that to you. Now, when we talked about direct and indirect costs, right? Direct costs are kind of exactly what they sound like. They're your tuition and fees, the stuff you directly have to pay to the university, okay? Those are the ones that many of us think of when we think about costs associated with school. However, we also have other expenses that need to get paid in order for us to exist as we go to school, right? Those are your indirect costs. They include things like your living expenses, books, supplies, materials, all of those things you need for school, transportation, and other personal or miscellaneous expenses. And that is also included as an estimate in the values that are provided in your cost of attendance. On the right-hand side of the screen, you're actually seeing an example of what that looks like, right? So you'll see here, we've got tuition, there's fees listed. Those are those direct costs that we talked about. Again, this is not your bill. This is an estimate, right? It's coming directly from the financial aid office or financial aid related figures. So it's important to know that. Your bill is always going to be what you actually receive from Student Financial Services in your Student Services Online account, or SSOL, okay? So you wanna make sure you're looking at that there. The reason that these are estimated is because we don't always have enough information in the financial aid office to know exactly what your charges will be. For example, the individual courses you take or your program could specifically have unique program fees or course fees related to them. So it's an evaluation of an expense at an estimated level, but it can be helpful for the purpose of planning. Now, with that said, the indirect costs are much the same, right? We use some of the tools that we talked about today, like the Consumer Price Index, to approximate what our students actually pay for some of these things, like personal expenses, which include your housing and your food, right? As well as some of those other things like books and supplies. So those are just meant to show you, these are things that you do have some tangible way of looking at to get an idea over a period of time what they could cost as a student here at the university. Let's see, are costs from CU Residential reflected on SSOL billing along with tuition and fees? Well, good question. In most cases, yes. There are some circumstances, and it's usually particular to some students at the medical center, but not exclusively. So there are some circumstances where it will not be billed on your actual SSOL bill. And if that's the case, you should be made aware of that by residential. So you would know that in advance. But by far and large, yes, you should see a monthly allotment get assessed on your tuition and fee statement from the university for your housing costs. So let's see from here. Now, if we want to make sure we're thinking about this in full, right? If we go through the whole process of looking at those income things that we have and our expenses, and we see that maybe we need a little bit more money, right? Whether that's, again, for now, or if we're preparing for next year, let's say, and we see something's changed and we're not going to have exactly what we need. We want to make sure we're looking to avoid borrowing as much as possible, wherever possible, right? So there are a few things that we want to do in advance of doing that. Again, can we make any reductions in our expenses? And do we have other resources we might be able to pursue? We have a couple of things here to help assist with determining what you might need to borrow within that context. For example, we're going to be sharing a resource related to some of the things that you should be including in your budget and some of those things that are very often kind of forgotten about or could be taken out very quickly. And we'll also include an iGrad article related to how you might decide what to borrow for school. I do see we have a question that came through. Is tuition fee paid year-wise or semester-wise? Yeah, so tuition is assessed as a yearly, tuition is assessed as a semester-based cost here at the university, so term by term. Your billing statement will be shared with you on a term basis. Now, we do have some students that choose to pay for a year at once. There may be a circumstance where you can do that. I would recommend reaching out to the billing office to do that. And I'll actually share their contact information as part of this presentation as well, so you can confirm if there's anything to do on that front. But by far and large, you're going to be assessed your charges on a term by term basis. So your billing will generally reflect a term to term charge. Now, a few tips on looking for some of those non-repayable fund sources that could be alternatives to student loans, right? We have a couple of resources here related to things like scholarships, fellowships, sponsorship opportunities, employment opportunities for those students that are able to work while they're at school, assistantships. There's a couple of these that are linked directly to different areas within the university's websites, and there's also a few that are linked directly to external websites. For example, the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs Exchange Program has some resources available for fellowship opportunities, as well as on sponsorship. There's U.S. government scholarships and programs and foreign government scholarship resources listed here. And I'll also be sharing something that kind of talks a little bit more about what each of these types of programs are. But the idea being, we don't want to just jump to a loan if we don't have to, okay, if we do find that we're a little short on expenses. Let's see, a question. Is the residential charges applicable even if not occupying CU housing? Okay, so that's a good question. So The only time you'll ever see actual build charges is if you've gone and gotten your housing through residential or another housing unit at the university. If you've gone and gotten off-campus housing, those are going to be assessed explicitly and directly outside of the university, even if we kind of give you resources to find it. You'll only ever have housing assessed to you from the university if you've signed a contract with university housing. So from here, I did want to show iGrad's got some really good information related to just if we don't know really how to potentially cut expenditures, right? Again, if we're looking to limit our expenses, how do we go about doing that realistically? This is information that can potentially be helpful in doing that. This is their Spending Less topic hub, and iGrad has a bunch of different topic hubs out there that you can utilize. And those topic hubs are just kind of individual topics with a lot of information to go with them, right? This one in particular is Spending Less. So we can see here, they've got a couple of articles related to it. Some of them are the most current articles that are available, and they'll also highlight the ones that are most popular by users throughout iGrad. And then from there, you'll also be able to look through and search through all of the content on this topic. So these are really good ways to kind of learn a little bit more about a topic that maybe you're just trying to explore a little bit more broadly. I see. I've heard that international students cannot gain employment during their first year in NYC. Is this true? So that is actually a question that I don't know that I can answer for you. It goes out beyond my scope, but it looks like Chad has got some information for you that he can share on that front. So from here, I do also want to show that iGrad has a really fantastic scholarship search engine as well, right? So if we're talking about things we don't have to pay back, we want to look for things like scholarships. And the nice thing is that iGrad will actually let you go through and choose the options that are explicitly related to those that do not require US citizenship. Okay, so for our international students, this can be a really helpful way to filter out for those scholarship opportunities that are explicit to you. I know that a lot of the time when we look at scholarship opportunities, they're generally kind of marketed toward domestic students. iGrad knows that that's not everybody we're talking to, right? Certainly not here at Columbia. We have a beautifully large international population of students. So to that end, you can use this tool to do filtering down just for those opportunities that are explicit to you as an international student. From there, you also can certainly filter it down a little bit more if you would like to do that. You can certainly do that by other types of eligibility requirements. For example, if you need to do type of essays or something like that, or if there's a need-based component related to it, you do have the capability to filter by amount as well. You can also choose whether or not it's just for a graduate school, for example, or if you're looking for undergraduate specific opportunities. And the best part, when you open up each of these opportunities, it gives you all the information explicitly about the scholarship right there. A lot of the time when you go to those scholarship search engines, right, you typically have to say, okay, there's one there, and then I got a link to that page, and then look all over the place for the requirements or criteria for it. That's not the case with iGrad. Once you click on the opportunity, it opens it up with all the key core components listed right there, and it has an apply button that'll take you directly to where you need to apply should you choose to do that. So this can be a really nice tool to help you do that as far as your scholarship searches go. From there, on the right-hand side of the screen, I did want to highlight some of the other courses that are available to you through iGrad. I won't go through them all entirely, but right now there's just over 30 of them. They just added another one, which is great. They're constantly adding new courses in there. You can certainly take a look at the whole list of them using the link that's there on the screen. And there's also one about looking for scholarships as well. So if you're just not sure on how to get started, it'll give you some information on that front. Now, if we do find that we need to borrow a student loan, right? Nobody wants to do it. We want to avoid it wherever we can, but at the same time, our education is important, right? We don't want to start getting to a point where we can't complete what we started unless, we don't have any options available to us, but also keeping in mind what we're comfortable with and what's available to us, right? If you're not somebody that wants to pursue a loan, those other options are probably your better bet. But again, if you find that this may be something you're looking to pursue, we want to talk about how to do that responsibly, okay? So if you do need to borrow, you want to only borrow what you need, right? A lot of the time when we see things for loans, it'll give us the option to borrow much more than we actually need to actually get through our educational experience, right? Make sure you're going through the information in your budget so you're only borrowing what you want to and need to borrow, okay? To do that as an international student, there are options for you like private student loans, which are non-federal loans that are made by a lender or financial institution like a bank, a credit union, state agency, or a school, okay? Now, as far as these loans, the way that they work, you've got terms and conditions that are unique to each one, including the interest rates that may apply, the terms for repayment, like how long you have to repay and when payment is expected, and more importantly, their eligibility criteria are all unique, right? So what that means is that you may be approved for a loan with one lender versus the other not approve it yet. They're all going to have their own criteria for doing it. One lender may require that you have a cosigner, another may not. But to that end, many of the ones that are available for international students may require a US domestic cosigner, okay? So there are a few that do not. We'll have a list that you can review should you need to ultimately pursue this as an option. That does list some of that information for you as well, but know that many of those opportunities may make mention to needing a US domestic cosigner if you're looking to pursue them. These loans can potentially have fixed or variable interest rates. So when we talk about fixed interest rates, that just means that the rate that you're provided at the onset of the loan is the rate you will have for that loan the entire time you have that loan, where a variable interest rate is going to fluctuate, okay? And it fluctuates based on dependent upon the type of loan, some type of market index, right? Not unlike inflation going up and down, market indexes do much the same thing. Typically in inverse, as inflation goes up, the other goes kind of not in a way we'd like, but nonetheless, those are kind of just ways to understand how your interest rate could go up and down in that circumstance, okay? Now, one of the nice things is that any loan that you're pursuing through a US financial institution of any kind, including private student loans, like you may as an international student, should you choose to, they are all required to comply with certain types of consumer-based rules. These are all found in what we call the Truth in Lending Act. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to go look up the Truth in Lending Act, okay? But the idea is that they're required to give you certain types of disclosures before you're allowed to actually receive this loan, so that you're not just able to be informed about the information beforehand, but you're provided the information directly to be informed. You don't have to necessarily go searching for it. It's going to come to you if you are pursuing one of these options. Now, one of the things that you do want to be aware of, right? If you do choose to utilize something like a private student loan, you want to make sure that you're monitoring your US credit reports for accuracy. This also speaks to some of those credit-based questions that were asked as well. When we talk about credit reports, that is just the record of your credit history, right? What you have done with your credit in the time that you've utilized it here in the US. Those are made available to you for free as a US credit user by visiting annualcreditreport.com. Okay. Most commonly, those are available to you once per year for the 3 major agencies that hold on to that information. There are 3, including Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. However, right now, annualcreditreport.com is allowing students to get that information once a week, if memory serves, right? So you can get those credit reports relatively frequently now. If you're starting to build your credit, that's something you might choose to do just to see how it's going, right? If what you're doing is being effective for you. I wouldn't suggest pulling it more than once every 2 months or so, just because the way that crediting agencies report information is typically on a 30 to 45-day cycle. If you're pulling it like once a week, it's not going to change every week, just so that you're not surprised by that. But doing it, every 2 months or so is probably not a bad idea while you have access to it. Now, when it goes back to eventually, I don't know when it will be, but when you can only get them once per year, one of the things that you can choose to do is, since there are 3 different versions of your credit report, again, Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, you could choose to pull one in the 4th month of the year, the next another 4 months later, the next another 4 months later. So this way you're monitoring throughout the year using different reports, and you have a good idea of what's on there. In relation to your private student loans, this is important because private student loans don't have a central repository of their own where you can look at the information, right? So what that means is if you pursue a private loan, and let's say the first year you go with one financial institution, and then maybe you decide you want to pursue another loan with a different financial institution later on down the line, they're not going to be able to be seen anywhere together but on your credit report. Okay. Now, each individual institution likely has their own way you can log in and look at the information, which is great. I would, you definitely want to do that too. But let's say you're trying to find out, if anything else is there, right? As we talked about, identity theft and fraud can happen. The best mechanism you have for fighting it is awareness. And the only way that you'll find those discrepancies, if something has happened that's not, terribly helpful for you, or somebody's been disingenuous, unfortunately, is by looking at your credit report. Okay. Now, beyond that, if you are looking for those private student loan opportunities, one of the things that the university has available to you is our suggested lender list, which is linked for you here directly on the screen. And this is specific to international students. And as you can see at the bottom right-hand side of the screen, this actually has a bunch of different loan options that may be available to you as an international student. This lets you compare them as you go through in a really, really easy way. Now, with that said, you do not have to use a lender from our suggested lender list. These are just options that are available to you. We encourage you to use any lender that makes the most sense for you. But if you're really not sure where to get started, this is a nice way to compare a bunch of information all at once. Okay. All right, so that brings me to the end of the formal part of our conversation. I do have a couple of websites I'd love to share with everybody and just give you an idea as to what they look like so that you're aware of them. Before I do, though, I think we had a few other questions pop in on Slido, and I don't want to not get to those. Let's see, we have, what advantages do credit unions offer over commercial banks? Yeah, that's a really, really great question. So it kind of gets to a couple of different things. A credit union might have different types of products that they offer that are unique to certain circumstances. In the US, one really good example of it is something like the Navy Credit Union or the Naval Credit Union. I may not be saying that correctly, I apologize. But they are very unique to the members of military, right? And what they'll do is they'll offer them unique types of rates and products based on their service for that reason. So it really depends on the actual credit union as to what they're trying to incentivize in their membership. And that's kind of why that membership idea is important for those. You can look for one that kind of really meets a specific set of circumstances that are unique to you, that may provide a unique benefit to you for that reason. It's a great question. Another one, do I need to deposit a minimum account while opening a bank account as an international student? That's a great question. So the answer, it depends. I hate giving that answer, I really do. But it really does depend on the type of account that you're pursuing. And if you're pursuing it, whether or not the institution has a certain type of rule associated with that account. For most savings accounts, they will typically require not just a deposit at hand, but also a minimum balance that you maintain in the account, just so that you have an awareness of that, and going below the balance could potentially result in fees if that's the case. With checking accounts, they'll usually have an initial deposit. In most cases, that's required, but the amount is going to be a little bit different for everybody, okay? They're usually not exuberant. Most of the time, you'll see it if you're looking at websites by going directly to their website. They'll list it right in the services information for the type of account that you're pursuing. If they do have the capability to offer you a student account based on your age, somebody did mention in the chat, for example, they're often tied to age when we talk about student-based accounts. They typically have lower thresholds, for example, and in some instances, you'll also see that some accounts, if you set up things like direct deposit, for example, you may not actually have to have either a minimum amount that you keep in the account, or they may not charge you the typical fee that they would for having the account, as an example. So this is, again, part of some of those questions that you want to keep in mind as you're going through the process to look for those accounts and asking, the representatives you speak with there for your specific circumstances. I see, let's see, what are the bank accounts currently available in Columbia University, and are we allowed to open as soon as we reach New York? So the university itself doesn't actually have a financial bank account to offer to students. We do have on campus a Santander Bank, but we are not affiliated with them. So you can utilize that. And I believe that Chad earlier on in the session popped in the chat a couple of the other banks that we've seen students utilize before. You're certainly welcome to look at those or any other financial institution of your choosing, just so that you have that awareness. But we don't have one that we're directly affiliated with, or we can't recommend one specifically because there's a lot of unique needs that you'll want to go ahead and understand there with your conversations. Let's see, is it possible to open a bank account with a social security number? And yes, I see that question came through, and Kanisha did the very right thing of answering yes. You do not necessarily need a social security number to open your account. You do have some other documents you can potentially utilize, and we have that on one of the earlier slides that we went through. And Chad just also did me the favor of popping that link directly into the chat as well. So that's definitely a few resources for you there that you can peek at. Now let's see, can I update the social security number in my bank account when I get it a few weeks after my arrival? Great question. Yes, you can. What I would recommend doing is going to the actual financial institution that you've ultimately opened your account with and let them know that you now have a social security number, and they will let you know the process for doing that. Let's see. I'm looking to see how much cash can I bring to the US? So That is actually a question that I don't have a great answer to. I don't know specifically that there are or are not limitations related to visa statuses for that. So I'll do some research on my side to see if I can provide a resource for you there. But at the same time, Chad, if you have any resources there, please do share them so that we have that. But I'll also do some additional research as well. And great point. Check with your airline as well about how much money is allowed to bring, because they may have certain rules and restrictions. That's a great point. How about availability of credit card for international students? Yeah, so you do have the capability to potentially utilize a credit card as an international student. Again, you may not necessarily need a social security number. It depends on the specific credit card that you're looking for. If you're looking at websites, and this goes for bank accounts too, because I think I saw somebody make that ask about getting something before they get here. You may potentially be able to open things before you get here, but again, it's going to depend, one, on any potential visa restrictions that are there in relation to that, and two, if it's allowed, the financial institution's rules about it, right? So you want to make sure you're getting in touch with that individual financial institution first so they can talk you through that information. As far as the credit side of it goes, it's very much the same thing. The credit cards that you apply for, if you're looking online, they'll typically list the requirements that you would need to provide in order to apply for the card. Not all of them require a social security number. If you're looking and you can't find it though, reach out to the financial institution associated with the card and they'll be able to tell you for sure. And could you send me the list of banks usually used by students once again? Yeah, of course, that'll be in the presentation for you materials so that you have that. Not a worry there, we'll make sure that you get that. And I'm just looking to see if we missed any other questions. I don't think that we did. So with that being said, I do want to make sure, I'm going to stop sharing my screen right quick because I do want to make sure that I show you at minimum one, the Student Financial Services website, because I do think that that's important. Make sure that you know where it is so you can find information. And two, how to get your iGrad account. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen again. All right, so this is actually the Student Financial Services website that you should now be able to see. And good news, we actually just last Friday updated this website. It was much more challenging to work through in advance of that. This is brand new. So good news, you got here at a good time as far as our website goes. But this is kind of your hub for anything related to your financial questions at the university. Just as some examples, right? If you're looking to kind of see a little bit more about billing and payments, you'll see that if you hover over the bills and payments section, you can find a lot of the different topics that go along with that, including the billing schedule, which somebody had asked about earlier. When you click on that, it'll actually show you right here when, first and foremost, they produce the bill, and that has to do with the charges that are listed on it, right? That's what's there through that point, when they send it to a student, and when then it would be due, and what's included on it, right? So here, this is going to be a first summer statement, for example, if you were coming for the summer semester. We'll see here that our first fall statement, which includes activity through the summer term, estimated fall term charges, and anticipated credits. You'll actually receive notification of that on Monday, August 14th, and it has a due date of Friday, September 22nd, 2023. So this goes on and on throughout the year, and it's updated periodically as we get closer to new semesters and new academic years, right? So if you're taking more than 1 year at the university, just so that you have that information. But this is just, again, to show you kind of where you would find that. And of course, there's other things related to that information on here. You can certainly just, again, hover right up above here and looking in this bills and payments section if you need more information about wire transfers or paying by mail. If you're a sponsored student, you have information here for that. For some of us, we may want information on authorized payers, for example. That's somebody that may be paying on our behalf, and it'll tell you how you can set that up. So again, this site is going to be really helpful within that context. In addition to that, if you want to get a better understanding of what your tuition and fees look like, this actually is a separate link that opens up in a new page that will let you go through and choose based on your year in school, the school that you're attending, let's say, and what program you're pursuing. Okay. It'll show you right there, based on that, for this academic year, the way that your tuition and fees will be assessed. And if there's any kind of unique things related to certain fees, for example, fees that are administered by other offices, like the health service fee, for example, they'll tell you where to go to learn more about it so that you have it right then and there. Okay. But I would highly encourage you to take a look here through this website again, because it's really, really helpful in the context of finding the information you need. If you need to fill anything out, If somebody says to you, I need this document, if you go to the forms and documents section, this is where the vast majority of that is housed. And it's got this really nice kind of search feature that you can utilize over here using keywords, make it really simple to find what you need. So just again, this will be kind of your one-stop shop for things related to student financial services. However, if you're going through this, again, it's a lot of information and you're still not sure where to go. If you click on this Get Help button that's here, it goes ahead and takes you to our student service center websites, right? So the student service centers are often the hubs that you'll want to go to ask questions. They kind of catch the questions related to financial services as well as enrollment services in most cases, and they'll go ahead and take them. And then if it's not appropriate for the individual that it's been sent to, they'll pass it off to the right office for you so it gets where you need to go. These offices are meant to be there to help you, so I encourage you to utilize them as well. But to that end, that's the last little bit of that particular piece I wanted to go through. I do see, just want to check and see if we had any other questions pop through. All right, so nothing too specific there. I do want to show you iGrad really quickly, just so that you're aware of what it looks like. Okay. So the website for iGrad's listed here. We've got columbia.igrad.com, really, really simple. And when you're ready to create your account, it's as simple as clicking sign up. From here, just like you would to sign into any of your university services, they'll ask you for your university network ID or your uni and your password. And once you've put that in, you can log in, go through the security process if you're at a point where you need to do that, and then you're in. That's it. That's the whole thing. And this is what iGrad actually looks like. You'll see that you have kind of this really nice sense of, task related stuff at the beginning onset, right? They have things to kind of incentivize you going through certain topics at certain periods here. That's what you're seeing with this kind of gamification style engagement that's available. It'll also talk to you about how to kind of just do an overview of your finances and see certain types of recommendations. But if you're ever just not sure where to go, this header is probably your best bet. If you go to the topics section, you can get to almost anything from here. It's really, really easy. If you don't see a topic that you want to look at, you can choose see all topics and then take a look from there. And of course, one of the really nice things that I'll have available for you as we wrap up today is I actually have a complete walkthrough video available for iGrad. So I will share a link to that with the presentation as well, so you can take a look at it. But beyond that, that was the last little bit of what I had to share directly today. I know that we've had questions come through, and if we didn't get a chance to get to everything, please, one, accept my apologies. Two, know that I'm not going to forget you. I will make sure that I take a look at the questions that came through and address any that we haven't gotten to, or if again, you have seen that we haven't gotten to something or you still want to ask something, my email is financialwellness@columbia.edu. You can go ahead and email me directly. I'm happy to help with that. I do hope the information's been helpful today. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and see if either Chad or Antonia had any other points that they wanted to touch on before we wrap up for the day.
I don't have anything, Trista. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I hope everyone found it really helpful, and we are always here as resources to help you out even afterwards. You'll get the recording and any resources in your email soon. Thank you all so much. Chad, anything?
Yeah, I just want to say a huge shout out to both Antonia and Tristia. So for those of you that are still here, please say a big thank you to Tristia. She just spent the last 90 minutes giving you a ton of information. So let's give her in the chat a lot of thanks and kudos. As she mentioned at the very beginning, this is just the beginning, right? ISSO is going to continue working with University Life and with Tristia's in her office to develop smaller workshops and sessions throughout the semester. So if you didn't catch everything today, don't worry. We're going to go back and revisit some of this stuff, and you'll have the opportunity to keep thinking about this. This is an ongoing process for all of us. There's a lot of great information, and as she said, we set goals where we assess our goals and we change and keep going. So again, Tristia, see the love coming into the chat. Thank you for all of your time. I will just put one more email or link into the chat. Everyone, there is a few more ISSO programming things coming up throughout the summer, pre-arrival, not all related to finances. So do take a look at that. We have an international student panel coming up. You'll see it on the calendar on the ISSO page. So it's another opportunity for you to ask current international students, okay, I know all this financial stuff. What is the bank that you used? Or, did you should you have brought something that you didn't bring? So we'll have some real international students giving some real advice as well later on. But again, happy Friday, everyone. Antonia, Tricia, thank you for your time, your energy, for reaching out to this group. And we will all be seeing you after the semester starts again.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Have a
Thank you
great
so
rest of
much.
today, everyone. Thank you.